Number 8. Bannermans Castle. If you thought you had to travel to Europe to see a castle, think again. Nestled on Polypel Island in New York State, a crumbling ruin that once housed military surplus sits abandoned in the middle of the Hudson River, just north of New York City. The island is just a 30-minute boat ride from the eastern bank of the river, and here you can see the Bannermans Castle. It was named after Irish-born Francis Bannerman VI. The island was first spotted by the businessman in 1900 when he and his wife were traveling. Bannerman was looking for a place to house his growing military surplus collection that he'd been storing in a 7-story storage on Broadway in New York City. After purchasing a large cache after the Spanish-American War, he needed a place to expand, and he thought the island would be the perfect place to do so. He bought the land for $1,600, which would be about $50,000 today. He blasted a section of land to make a place for his warehouse. But that was just the beginning. Looking to create something a little more eye-catching than an ordinary concrete building, he brought in a team of day laborers to recreate the castle from crude sketches he'd done on scrap paper. It had terraced gardens, a dry moat, a drawbridge, and a smaller structure also added as a summer home and to welcome special guests. When it was new, it probably looked like something straight out of a fairy tale. But the idyllic setting didn't last for long. Some 10 years after setting down roots, an explosion in the nearby powder house broke windows on both banks of the river, and it could be heard up to 50 miles or 80 kilometers away. Luckily, Bannerman's wife, who had been sitting in a hammock, had briefly left to get a cold drink, returned unscathed, only to find a chunk of concrete in the hammock where she had been just moments before. Days later, most of the debris had been removed, but damage to the roof and windows was never repaired. After the couple died, the island was put up for sale and most of the munitions were removed. The government of New York State bought it in 1967. Astonishingly, remnants of the cache still remain, with some estimates putting 50% of the cannons scattered around the US as originating from Bannerman Island. A fire in the late 1960s destroyed much of the castle, and weather took its toll on what remained. The castle is now overgrown and reclaimed by nature, and stands as a glimpse into the past of one man's dream to leave a mark on the Hudson. Number 7. Foxtrot-class submarine, Russia. The Foxtrot-class diesel-electric vessel was quite active during the Cuban Missile Crisis. This class of submarine nearly started World War III, when a group that had been patrolling in the Caribbean were spotted by American surface ships. The submarines were pursued, with the US dropping signal depth charges to locate them. A commanding ship of a small Soviet submarine flotilla believed they were under attack and that war had broken out. Armed with a nuclear-tipped tornado, the ship's political officer and captain were prepped to arm and fire the torpedo. Luckily, an admiral aboard refused to give his consent, and nuclear war was averted. The now obsolete ships have ended up in some very interesting places, with one even docked next to the Queen Mary in Long Beach, California. Another, left to rot in Amsterdam after being temporarily used as a presentation space, sits rusting as owners refuse to pay the towing fees to take the 1950s-built vessel away. Built in the Soviet Union, 58 vessels were built for the Soviet Navy, with 2 of its 3 decks dedicated to the batteries needed to keep the machine moving. It was a slow vessel that was crowded and relatively small compared to others. By the time the last sub in its class was launched, the design was obsolete, and with the last of the Foxtrots retired between 1995 and 2000, they are now a relic of the Soviet defense program. Have you ever been on a submarine? What was it like? Did you feel claustrophobic? Tell me your thoughts in the comment section below. Then remember to subscribe to Talltanic if you haven't already for more intense videos. Number 6. Herta Island Ghost Town, Hebrides. Over 100 miles or 160 kilometers from mainland Scotland, the St. Kilda archipelago sits in the Atlantic Ocean. With 4 islands out in the harsh water, Herta Island, the largest, has a storied past as one of the UK's most remote islands. Created by a volcanic eruption long ago, The rugged terrain has high slopes that plunge into the ocean and can only be reached via a small bay after an 18-hour boat ride from the mainland. Inaccessible much of the year due to turbulent seas, St. Kilda is known to have had inhabitants from prehistoric times, with the last of the residents leaving in 1930. Part of the Kingdom of His Excellency of the Islands in the 15th century, St. Kilda boasts a Viking settlement and the remains of Viking burial tombs. With limited resources, those who could tough it out relied upon birds for meat, eggs, and oil, as well as fishing when the weather permitted. Crops like potatoes and sheep, who provided milk and wool, also sustained these hardy people who were governed by a council consisting of all the men on the island. Keeping mostly to themselves, residents began welcoming visitors in the mid-19th century, soon relying on the income to procure supplies during the short summer months. But life was hard on the island, and in the 1800s, when the Australian government funded immigrants to settle on the continent, some 42 islanders left Herta behind on a voyage across the ocean. Sadly, only half of the pioneers survived the trek to start a new life in Australia. Over the following years, life went downhill for the remaining islanders. Increased interaction with visitors brought disease and a sharp rise in infant mortality. The British set up a navy base on the island, but it was a double-edged sword. Islanders benefited from regular mail and supply deliveries, but in turn, they learned more about life on the mainland, and life on Herta did not look so idyllic in comparison anymore. In 1930, the last of Herta's residents were evacuated to work in the funerary forest in Scotland. Now, only the resident colonies of seabirds, including 100,000 puffins and gannets, call Herta home. Number 5. Islas de las Muñecas, the Island of the Dolls. Abandoned places like the Island of the Dolls in Mexico are scary enough on their own, but the dark past and how the island came to be is equally disturbing. Wondering how an entire island near Mexico City could become home to hundreds of decaying dolls? It all started when a man named Don Julian Santana Barrera, who was suffering from emotional problems, left his wife and family and retreated to the island. While hiding there, Don Julian discovered the body of a young girl who had drowned. Not long after, a doll came floating down the canal, which Don Julian took as an omen that he needed to appease the spirit of the dead girl. Hanging the doll in a nearby tree, Don Julian took on the role of island caretaker, but he did more than simply look after the place. Over the next 50 years, Don Julian collected dolls from the canals and from the trash, hanging them like the first doll in the island's many trees. Some were whole, but others were headless or taken apart. Over the years, the dolls became victims of the elements, with dirt and grime transforming them into a haunting display. Sadly, while his family never believed he ever found the body of a girl, Don Julian was convinced of it, and devoted the rest of his life to honoring her in this macabre way. Unfortunately, Don Julian went to his grave believing, and sadly, he too also became a victim of the very canal where he believed the young girl lost her life. In 2001, his body was found drowned, bringing to end the sad chapter of his solitary life. In a twist that might bring his spirit some comfort, people continue to visit the island to this day, bringing dolls that they hang in tribute to the mysterious girl who died there and the man who made it his mission to never forget her. Number 4. Cyprus Varosha Beach Resort. Do you think it would be cool to stumble across a ghost town? Well, for the first time since the 1970s, a ghost town beach resort in North Cyprus has reopened and is ready for visitors. The Varosha Resort had been abandoned decades ago, after Turkey invaded the island in the Mediterranean. For years, the island was considered a kind of no man's land between the two groups living there, with the area acting as a barrier between the Turkish north and the Greek south. But in the summer of 2020, local authorities hinted that the town would once again be opened. Once home to 25,000 residents and boasting more than 12,000 hotel rooms, the popular island was known for its beachfront, earning it the nickname of the French Riviera of Cyprus. Once a booming resort town, popular with the rich and famous, Turkish forces took control of the island and blocked it off in the mid-1970s, after which the sun-kissed playground fell into disrepair. Now, after revamping the collapsing hotels and crumbling shopping district in the vacation town, the barren wasteland with its rusting barricades and fences is set to welcome visitors once again. Residents still live in the city of Famagusta, but the Varosha district had, up till now, been blocked off. In a stunning revelation, the Prime Minister of the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus declared that he was starting the process of allowing public access to the land, the streets, and beach. International authorities, however, were outraged by the move, believing it goes against international laws and decisions made by the UN Security Council. Still, the beach was, in fact, reopened in late October, with a handful of visitors snapping selfies in front of the still crumbling remains of the once buzzing tourist hub. EU representatives continued to be concerned that the move would cause more tension amid Cyprus settlement talks. Although it may not look like the ghost town you pictured in your head, this beachfront resort, once a place for rest and relaxation, is one that continues to spark controversy. Number 3. Belgium Doddy Park, Moorland. Located in Belgium, close to the French border, the oldest amusement park in Europe sits decaying in the forest. Opened in the 1950s by a local pasture for the children of families visiting a local basilica, the playground eventually expanded into a theme park. It had a collection of amusement rides, including a long suspension bridge, swings, slides, a carousel, and bumper cars. Unfortunately, a series of accidents at the park took place on increasingly run-down rides. The last straw was a very serious accident in 2000, when a young boy lost his arm on one of the rides. As visitor numbers steadily declined, the park fell into disrepair and Doddy Park closed. At the time, it was only a temporary shutdown, with owners vowing to renovate and perform maintenance. But finding an investor and competition from other larger amusement parks put a dent in the plans, and the park was eventually abandoned. Over the following 10 years, several other attempts to revive the now crumbling park occurred, but nothing came of the efforts. Now, the one-time playground and amusement park sits abandoned and rusting among the plants and trees. Demolition of the park began in 2012, with urban explorers continuing to visit the spot. Finally, in 2016, the original owner decided to turn the relic into a green recreational and residential area. Number 2. Georgia Koch Pillar. A stunning site west of Georgia's capital city in Eastern Europe, the Kosiki Pillar is a refuge for monks who were looking to get closer to God in their worship. Difficult to reach, with no trains traveling to the remote region, the trek must be taken by car or bus, and once one arrives, there is a 20-minute hike up a steep pillar. But taking this arduous climb is worth it, because once you make it to the top of the 130-foot or 40-meter tall limestone column, you will find a church that was built in the 6th to 8th centuries. Dedicated to a 7th century monk named Maximus the Confessor, the church also has a burial chamber, a wine cellar, and 3 hermit cells. But it isn't only tourists who visit the site. Every day, monks living below the pillar make the 20-minute climb on a metal ladder that has been bolted to the side of the limestone rock to say their prayers. Interestingly, a monk named Father Maximi Kavtaradze lived on top of the rock for 20 years. But for those who want to worship there but are not too keen on climbing so high, there is a smaller church, monastery, and the ruins of an old wall and belfry at the base to visit. Number 1. Skellig Islands. A twin-peaked island off the southwest coast of Kerry County in Ireland, Skellig Michael, or St. Michael's Rock, was once home to monks in the 6th century who created a remote refuge on the site. Dedicating it to St. Michael, the patron saint of high places, Skellig Michael housed a refuge at its summit above the rough waves below. A precarious stairway leading to the top remains today, but it's not mortar holding the 1,000-year-old steps together. But the spectacular early medieval island monastic site is not only a beacon to curious tourists, it also houses many rare birds, including puffins and some 23,000 nesting pairs of a bird known as the northern gannet. While the first written account of the locale comes from the late 8th century, it's believed that the monastery could have been established as early as the 6th century. There are also reports of rampaging Vikings coming to Skellig Island in the 9th century, believing the monks were housing valuable objects. To this day, the monastery buildings remain remarkably preserved. Beehive-type huts sit on a platform with crosses and a cemetery with 22 early grave slabs. Archaeologists believe that no more than a dozen monks lived here at any given time, and excavations at the site have found the remains of at least 8 individuals, all either adult males or children from 9 to 11 years old. Much superstition surrounds the island, with false tales of everything from unseen forces walking through the property to the belief that an ancient serpent temple had been built there. For those wondering what such a fantastical place might look like, you can catch an extensive glimpse at Skellig Michael in The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi movies in the Star Wars franchise. Which of these abandoned things was your favorite? Tell me in the comments below. Thank you for watching, subscribe to Talltanic if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.